Hi, I'm Christopher Carrick. Those of you who heard me talk last time, remember I talked about the spiritual role of conflict in relationships, and I think you'll find this subject is kind of similar. Um, this time I'm going to talk about what it means to be growth-oriented. Now, the reason I think this is important to look at is because it seems like an obvious thing. Um, it's sort of like saying, do you believe in being a good person? But when we look at our actions, sometimes it turns out that what we claim to believe and what we actually believe are two different things. So this is an idea that comes up in my work a lot. And what I'd like to do is kind of define it for you. So as I thought about this, one of the things that came up for me was a client of mine who is definitely a growth-oriented person. And twice in consecutive relationships, he ran into this issue with his girlfriend. So what happened was he went into the relationship, and both times they had done a lot of personal work, and they'd worked on themselves. They'd been in therapy. They read the right books, and he thought, "Oh, great! We'll have a growth-oriented relationship." And when he would bring it up, when he would introduce it, when he would invite them to work on themselves and look at things and support each other, they would run into problems. They would avoid, they would decline, they got uncomfortable. And he started to get really frustrated because he thought it seemed hypocritical to him. This was, he had an expectation. They seemed growth-oriented to him. And what was the problem? So after talking about it for a while, I felt like the question was, are you sure? Have you made an assumption? Are they really growth-oriented? Here's why. Every living thing has the innate instinct to avoid pain. So unless we consciously override that, that's going to be our response to a challenge, to discomfort. And being growth-oriented involves dealing with discomfort. So the first thing I would say that defines it for me is the idea that discomfort can be seen as opportunity. That's where the growth opportunity is. So we have to make friends with discomfort. We have to be willing to work through it to get the gold on the other side. So I think what he was experiencing was he was presenting them with an uncomfortable proposition, and they were moving away from pain. The other aspect that I think defines growth orientation is a willingness to experience ego death. So when we grow, when we really grow, especially spiritually, in a sense, the challenge is to outgrow ourselves, to outgrow our definition of ourselves. So our ego is our self-image. It's how we see ourselves. And an ego death occurs when we can fundamentally no longer see ourselves the way we used to. And this can be very painful. And the ego is not interested in this. So the challenge is, again, to be conscious of that's where the opportunity is, and to potentially welcome an ego death if we really want that growth. So as an example of ego death, I thought I'd talk about 20 years ago, I was very seriously pursuing being an actor in Los Angeles. And it was very important to me that if you were going to know me, that you had seen me be really good, because I felt like you don't know me if you haven't seen me at my best. And this is what I want you to understand about me. And this is how I want to be seen. So, you know, my life took a turn. I was called in a different direction. I actually left acting behind, which I never would have been able to conceive of prior to that. And a couple of years ago, I had an opportunity to perform again. And what I found was it was a lot like being an athlete. You can't just pick it up again. I was sort of out of shape. And I wasn't as good as I used to be. Now, the difference was, in my previous ego incarnation, this would have been a disaster. I actually remember saying, when I was serious about acting that I had no plan B. This was either going to work or I was going to have a disastrous midlife crisis. So a couple of years ago, when I really wasn't performing as well as I had hoped, I wasn't happy about that. I would have liked to have been as good as possible, but it wasn't life or death. And I thought, well, it's no longer part of my ego definition. So that's a thing that I think when we're trying to grow, we have to be willing to experience. We have to be willing to outgrow who we are, which is very uncomfortable. The reason I would say that my clients, what I suggested to him was that he actually go and check with them, with his girlfriends. That he say, here's how I define being growth oriented. It means we're going to have to explore ego death. It means we're going to have to see discomfort as opportunity, and see if you get the buy-in, see if you get agreement. Because again, a lot of people are going to say growth, I'm up for that. That sounds good. But what about in practice? So first get the buy-in, get the agreement. See if they say, yes, I want to do that. The reason I think that he maybe have been confused is because there's a difference between healing and growth. When people ask me the difference between what I do, spiritual direction, and therapy, there's a lot of ways to answer that, but that's the main thing I call attention to, is that therapy is really focused on healing, and what I do is really focused on growth. Now, when you work on healing, growth happens, and when you work on growth, there is healing. But in each case, you are really fundamentally doing one thing or the other. I think of it a little like a business being in the red or the black. If you're operating at a deficit, you're looking to get back to zero. You're growing your business, but you're growing it in order to make it viable. Once it's viable, once you're in the black, now you're looking to grow it, and you're no longer. Now you can actually work with debt. My guess would be with his girlfriends, what had happened was, as I mentioned before, we tend to move away from pain, especially if we're unconscious. What probably happened was whatever they were struggling with got to the point where they kind of had to face it. In other words, their focus became reducing pain. The pain got to be too much. And so they went into therapy. So they worked on it. And they got better. And they liked that. They liked their life working better. But it's a little like when somebody stops taking their medication because they feel better. You know, if you're schizophrenic and you think, okay, now I'm good, I'll stop taking the medicine. You've only accomplished so much, and so somebody who has been in enough pain to become focused on their healing might choose to stop growing once they're sufficiently out of pain. Growth, on the other hand, is focused on moving through discomfort, going into the unknown, dealing with difficulty to have a fuller and richer experience of yourself on the other side. So, as I mentioned, I suggested that he get buy-in from them, and then when it comes up again, say, so here we are. This is one of those times. Remember, you agreed to this. Do you still want to do it? And try it and see, because it's one thing to like it in theory. It's another to do it in practice. You want to really, I would say, measure their words against their choices. So you won't be surprised to find out that neither of those relationships worked, and he outgrew both of them because being growth-oriented was his priority. So once again, there's many ways to look at what it means to be growth-oriented, but the two things I would focus on are seeing discomfort as opportunity and recognizing that an ego death is a possibility and not letting that deter you. And that being conscious of both of those really allows you to work consciously on growth. Otherwise, it's very likely that we will just reflexively and unconsciously avoid pain. So thanks for watching. If you want to hear more stuff like this, you can go to my Facebook group and join up. It's called Your Spiritual Adventure. Good to talk to you.